Welcome everyone to the Rulebook Room. I'm Harp and I'm so glad you're here. Today we are diving into a fascinating case from 1950 that takes us into the heart of Muslim personal law, child marriage, consent, and a doctrine that many law students hear about but rarely get the chance to explore in depth. The option of puberty or Khiyar ul Buluk. The case is Ghulam Sakina versus Falak Sheikh Allah Baksh, reported in AIR 1950 Lahore 45. A young woman approaches the court seeking dissolution of a marriage that was arranged during her childhood. But when we look closely, we find that the case is really asking a much larger question. Can a girl who was married off as a child be compelled to remain in that marriage for the rest of her life? Or does Muslim law recognize her right once she grows up and gains legal capacity to decide for herself whether she wants to continue in that relationship? To answer that question, the Lahore High Court had to examine classical Muslim law, the nature of marriage as a contract, the powers of guardians, and the meaning of puberty in Islamic jurisprudence, and the effect of statutory reform introduced through the Dissolution of Muslim Marriages Act 1939. So let's begin with the facts. The plaintiff in this case was Ghulam Sakina. She filed a suit seeking dissolution of her marriage. Her primary argument was simple. She claimed that she had never willingly entered into any marriage with the defendant. She stated that if any marriage had in fact taken place, it was arranged during her infancy, and she had never approved or ratified the marriage after attaining sufficient age and understanding. Initially, she also raised an argument that she belonged to the Sunni sect while the defendant was a Shia, but that issue ultimately disappeared from the case because evidence showed that both parties belonged to the Sunni community. The defendant, however, told a very different story. He argued that marriage was perfectly valid. According to him, the marriage had been arranged by the plaintiff's father when she was a child. He further stated that it was part of an exchange marriage arrangement between the families. Most importantly, he contended that the marriage had already been consummated and the parties had lived together as husband and wife. Now, this issue of consummation would eventually become the central battleground in this case. The trial court examined the evidence and concluded that marriage had indeed been arranged during the plaintiff's infancy by her father. However, the court found no reliable evidence proving consummation. On that basis, the trial court granted a decree in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant appealed. The district judge reversed the decision and held that consummation had in fact been proved. Because of that finding, the plaintiff's claim was rejected. The plaintiff then approached the Lahore High Court. Interestingly, by the time the matter reached the High Court, many of the factual disputes had become secondary. The court identified one central legal question. Had the plaintiff validly exercised her right under Section 2, Clause 7 of Dissolution of Muslim Marriages Act 1939? Everything depended on the interpretation of this provision. Before examining the court's reasoning, we need to understand the statutory framework. Section 2, Clause 7 of the Dissolution of Muslim Marriages Act provides that a Muslim woman is entitled to obtain a decree dissolving her marriage if she was given in marriage by her father or another guardian before attaining the age of 15 years, if she repudiates the marriage before attaining the age of 18 years, and provided the marriage had not been consummated. Those are the three conditions. First, the marriage before 15. Second, repudiation before 18. And third, absence of consummation. The court first examined whether the plaintiff satisfied the age requirements. The marriage register showed that the marriage took place on 23rd November 1932. The evidence showed that the plaintiff was approximately 1 year old at that time. In fact, one witness suggested she may have been only a few months old. There was therefore absolutely no dispute that she had been married long before reaching the age of 15. Similarly, there was no dispute that she had instituted the suit before attaining the age of 18. That meant the real controversy was the third requirement. Had the marriage been consummated? But before answering that question, the court took a step back and explored the historical foundations of Muslim law. And this is perhaps the most interesting part of the judgment. The court reminded us that under classical Muslim law, marriage is fundamentally a contract. Unlike traditions that view marriage primarily as a sacrament, Islamic jurisprudence has long treated marriage as a civil contract requiring consent. But what happens when the parties are children? Children lack legal capacity. Because of that, Muslim law historically allowed guardians to contract marriages on behalf of minors. This is where classical doctrine becomes particularly important. Under traditional Hanafi law, if a marriage was arranged by a guardian other than the father or parental grandfather, the child generally retained a right to reject the marriage upon attaining puberty. However, when the marriage has been arranged by the father or paternal grandfather, the position was different. Such marriages are generally regarded as binding. The child ordinarily had no right to repudiate them. That was the ancient reading of Muslim law. The authority of the father occupied a privileged position. But the Lahore High Court pointed out that this classical position had been significantly altered by legislation. The Dissolution of Muslim Marriages Act of 1939 changed the law. The act placed the father and paternal grandfather on substantially the same footing as other guardians. A girl married during childhood was now granted a statutory right to repudiate the marriage. In other words, the law recognized that decisions made on behalf of children should not necessarily bind them forever. The court viewed this as a major legal reform. And then the court turned to the heart of the matter, the doctrine known as the option of puberty. The judges observed that this doctrine was often misunderstood. The right to repudiate does not arise during minority, it arises after puberty. Why? Because only after puberty does a person acquire legal capacity to make an informed choice. The entire process of the doctrine is to give the individual an opportunity to either accept or reject a contractual arrangement entered into during childhood. The court emphasized a very important principle. Anything done during minority cannot amount to legal effective consent. A child simply does not possess the legal capacity required for binding consent. And this principle becomes crucial because the defendant argued that the marriage had been consummated. The High Court examined the evidence carefully. The judges found it remarkably weak. The defendant himself had never clearly stated when consummation allegedly took place. Even when specifically asked to provide details, he avoided giving a definite answer. The court found this omission highly suspicious. If consummation had genuinely occurred, one would expect at least an appropriate time frame. Instead, the evidence was vague, inconsistent, and unconvincing. The court also examined letters exchanged between the families. Those letters suggested strained relations and indicated that plaintiff had continued to reside with her father. Witnesses' testimony was contradictory. The overall picture simply did not support the defendant's claim. The district judge had also relied heavily on another argument. The plaintiff had refused to undergo a medical examination. The lower court treated this refusal as evidence supporting consummation. The High Court firmly disagreed. It pointed out that refusal to submit to medical examination could never substitute actual proof. Consummation had to be established through evidence. It could not be presumed merely because a woman denied medical examination. The court even referred to earlier Privy Council authority, rejecting similar reasoning. Then came the most important legal question. Suppose consummation had occurred while the girl was still a minor. Would that destroy her right to repudiate the marriage later? The court's answer was clear: no. Even if consummation occurred after puberty, the right to repudiate could survive. Why? Because legal consent becomes meaningful only after legal capacity exists. A child cannot be said to have voluntarily ratified a marriage in the eyes of law. The court explained that any true assent must come after puberty, not before. Only after reaching puberty can a person consciously decide whether to continue the marital relationship. This reasoning reflects both contractual principles and deeper notions of personal autonomy. The court was effectively saying that a marriage arranged during childhood ultimately requires the informed acceptance of the individual whose life is affected by it. And that acceptance must come after the individual acquires the capacity to choose. Applying these principles to the facts, the court reached its conclusion. The plaintiff had married during infancy. She had repudiated the marriage before attaining 18 years of age. The alleged consummation had not been proved. And assuming there was consummation during minority, it would not have extinguished her statutory right. The very filing of the suit itself was regarded as a valid exercise of her option to repudiate the marriage. Accordingly, the Lahore High Court allowed the appeal. The judgment of the district judge was set aside. The decree granted by the trial court was restored, and plaintiff had eventually succeeded. So, what is the lasting significance of this case? The ratio of the decision is that a Muslim woman married during childhood may validly repudiate that marriage under Section 2, Clause 7 of the Dissolution of Muslim Marriages Act 1939 before attaining 18 years of age, and any alleged consummation during minority does not by itself extinguish that right because legally effective assent can arise only after puberty and legal capacity. What makes this judgment particularly compelling is that it does not reject classical Muslim law. Instead, it works from within the tradition. The court acknowledged the contractual nature of a marriage, the historical role of guardians, and the doctrine of puberty as understood by Muslim jurists. Yet, it also recognized the transformative impact of modern legislation designed to protect young women from being permanently bound by decisions made on their behalf as children. In that sense, the judgment stands at the intersection of tradition and reform. It preserves the language of classical jurisprudence while emphasizing a profoundly modern idea that meaningful consent matters. And ultimately, this is what the case is really about. Not simply marriage, not simply guardianship, but the right of a person to decide for herself whether a marriage arranged in childhood should define the rest of her life. Thank you so much for joining me today in the Rule Book Room. I'm Harp, and I'll see you in the next episode where we continue unpacking landmark judgments and the legal ideas that shaped them. Until then, take care, keep questioning, keep learning, and bye.